Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Be My Guest. Your host Dave Mignano here, and I have another great episode to bring you today. Now, my guest today is Mr. Michael Weinberg. Now, he's somebody who is a really avid follower of No Vacancy Live, the #1 hospitality podcast. So if you haven't seen that show, make sure you check it out. But Michael's kind of in a cool position where, I've never really spoken to Michael before. So again, kind of the other shows, I'm going to be learning about his story as you do. But he's also someone I feel like I know because for the last year and change at No Vacancy Live, he's always there. He's always commenting. We've been connected through that. So it's kind of a weird dynamic here that I'm looking forward to learning more about a person who I feel like I've known for a long time. So why don't we just get right into it? But first, real quick, remember, always go to YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Check us out, like us, subscribe, hit the bell, all the good stuff so you can stay focused and up to date on what is happening and who is my next guest. So without further ado, let's bring in Mr. Michael Weinberg. Michael.
Hey, Dave.
Appreciate you being my guest today. Really thank you for that. And as I was saying in the intro, you heard it. It's kind of a weird dynamic. I don't know really much about you, but I feel like I know you a lot because for the last year and a half, we've been kind of, together on No Vacancy Live.
That's the awesome part of this is that I feel like I know you as well. I've been an everyday watcher of No Vacancy Live. It's a masterclass in hospitality, in all forms of hospitality. And it's something that is near and dear to my heart. And it's been really cool. They always refer to you as producer Dave. And, it's always cool to, kind of get behind the curtain, as it were, and talk with you. And it's a pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me.
No, thank you, Michael. And again, it's kind of like the, that old Wizard of Oz adage, right? Pulling back the curtain a little bit. I'm usually behind the scenes, kind of the silent participant. But I'm looking forward to really having a nice conversation with you today because, again, seeing your story, through No Vacancy Live, you've been very open and transparent in comments and things like that. So that's why I find it's going to be a great story to talk about because you are in a situation that was, similar to mine at the very least, in that you had been established in your career in hospitality in a primary city in the U.S., which we'll get into, one that was devastated by COVID, one that is still devastated by COVID. We're filming this one, probably about a week before it comes out. So right now it's, mid-April. And, New York City for a large part has not come back fully. And Chicago, which is where you're based out of, has not come back fully. So you hear certain conversations about parts of the country coming back, and it sounds great. But at the same time, it must feel a little frustrating when you're like, yeah, great, Miami's doing well. And, Texas is doing, areas of Texas are doing well. But hey, Chicago's not doing well. And I'm still heavily impacted by that. So how do you feel as you kind of see parts of the country opening back up and you and your colleagues in Chicago are still really feeling the brunt of this?
First and foremost, I'm excited for the industry, for my colleagues in Miami, in Texas, and places that are able to open up. Certainly no grudges, and as I've always felt, this every setback that our industry has is temporary. I was in the industry back on 9/11 and saw that all crumble. I was a part of the industry. I've been in the industry for over 25 years. So, I've seen the industry crumble a number of times. And what I've learned in all of my time in the industry is that, look, this is all temporary. So I'm happy that there are green shoots, people going back to work in other parts of the country. Yeah, I'm a little frustrated here in Chicago because, it's not coming back as strongly. And on top of that, the positions that I am seeing are non-sales positions. And for someone who has spent his whole life in sales and marketing, those positions are even fewer and far between. But on an optimistic note, I've got to tell you, I know it's temporary and I know it's coming. So that's where I'm focusing my energy, and that's where I've focused my energy very candidly since what I call the pandemic pause. It's going to end, and we'll all be back to work soon enough.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, in New York, like I said, the demand is still not truly there, but it's getting better, right? We're seeing it come back. We're starting to see a little bit of rate drive, especially on the weekends. I think more importantly, we're seeing some of these bigger hotels open up, right? I've been very fortunate to get a position in the city within the last month, but we're seeing the Mandarin Oriental has reopened. We're seeing the Hilton Midtown, which is the largest hotel in New York by room count, is starting to hire in anticipation of reopening. Some hotels have kicked back their opening, so it's kind of like where are we really going with this? But what is the feeling in Chicago, right? We're getting a positive energy in New York. What is the feeling in Chicago about, the short term? I mean, I say short term, I mean that 3 to 8 month window of there being a big rush in demand.
I think that it's very similar to what's going on in New York. Hotels, unlike New York City, unlike New York City, Chicago does not get a lot of leisure business. It can't survive on leisure business, especially during the cold months. So there really is an extraordinary focus on meetings and conventions and business travelers. Right. So I would go along with what the experts are predicting, which is the smaller meetings, will start to come back by the fall. I don't have a pulse quite candidly on the conventions and whether those are going to come back and how they're going to come back, and are they going to come back hybrid? Are they going to come back with a smaller number of people? I don't quite have a handle on that, but the benefit that New York has is that leisure guest, and so many people in the tri-state area there, right? Here in Chicago, it's just not the same, and so I'm not quite sure where that's going. I can tell you that I just heard from one of my former colleagues at some of the Hilton properties, and some of those big properties here in Chicago, the open date has been pushed back 6 times now.
Yeah.
To hear that the Hilton New York Midtown is starting to rehire, that's great news. I know a lot of people who were furloughed from their jobs there, but that's great news for them. Chicago's not quite there yet.
Okay, well, we're not going to go into the whole dynamics of when they're coming back. If you guys want to learn more about that, head over to No Vacancy Live every Monday through Thursday. You see the plug right there. That's my own version of a shameless plug, Michael.
That was awesome. That was awesome.
But let's talk about you. So, you're in the industry for 25 years. You're in sales for even longer than that, and you said you've been through several down cycles. So you've been through 9/11. You've been through 08, right? Certainly, I think everybody can agree, just from a impact standpoint on a global scale of the tourism industry, this has been much more devastating than both, probably even combined, if you want to take it that far. So, and again, thinking about New York and thinking about this area, 2019, we were rocking and rolling. I'm sure Chicago was very similar. The first two periods of 2020 were doing well. Thinking back to now, it's over a year ago, which is amazing to say. What was going through your mind when 2020 started to happen, and I should say March of 2020 started to happen, and things started to fall apart? And what was kind of your story from when March 1st hit all the way through when you ended up, eventually being furloughed?
That's a great question. So I had taken a short detour, still with it. So my specialty is tour and travel and leisure. So I had taken a short detour. I was hoping perhaps it wasn't going to be a short detour, but I had taken a short detour, and a position had been created for me at a tour operator called Mayflower Cruises and Tours. And literally, I started that job on March 2nd. And by that point, there was talk about COVID. Some of the cases were showing up not only in Seattle, which, as you may recall, was kind of where it was first discovered, and then literally just down the street from me were cases number 3 and 4 in the United States were discovered. So at that point, literally about to start my job on March 2nd, I'm waiting for an email to come from my boss to say, hey, we were really happy to bring you on board.
Right.
And now we just can't do it anymore. So I was relieved, quite candidly, that I went to work that day on March 2nd, had the training, was ready to go, doing sales, business development. And that all went, and as news is starting to filter out, states are starting to shut down. Travel is starting to come to a screeching halt. In business development and in sales, you've got to figure out a message. And this is what I did, right? You've got to figure out a message that is hopeful, that it not only for your clients, but for their clients, right? So I was like, okay, we know this is temporary. It feels really bad right now. And this is if I could even get people on the phone. It feels really bad right now, but you're going to want to have business on your books when this thing is over. So let's do business. Long story short, with no income coming in to a tour operator, there's no way to fund a position that was relying on me to bring in the business. So, it was a month later, but it was a great, for that 1 month that I was there, it was a great opportunity for me to take a lot of the skills and grit and determination that I've learned over my career and say, look, I've got to frame the message. My job is to bring business into this company for as long as I'm employed. Frame the message, be excited about it, be passionate about it, and just keep going until they tell you to stop.
That's a great message. And, I think one that you probably have taken, whether you've known it or not, have taken into the following year, right? Because now you're trying to find positions, you're trying to stay motivated, you're trying to sell yourself, right? And sell your brand message. So, how have you, I guess let's talk about that. Like, what lessons have you learned over the last year, and how have you been able to take your sales skills and try to kind of apply them to yourself as you've been in your job search?
That's a great question. I think that what I've learned, so there were a couple of people right at the beginning of the pandemic who had a very profound effect on me as far as how to approach this pandemic pause, no matter how long it was going to be. And one of them was a speaker that he does podcasts. He's an MC. His name is Tom Singer. And he said to me that every day he was going to call somebody who knows more than he does, and get information and keep the dialogue going. And that had a very profound effect on me. That, okay, I knew not to just sit still, because you can never just sit still.
Right.
You create your own opportunities. So I knew that, but hearing Tom talk about that and bring that to the fore was a really important message to me. Another person who I spoke with was one of my former colleagues at Hilton. And what he said was that, you need to check on people during this pandemic.
Yeah.
It's one thing after, 3 weeks, just making sure somebody's, after 3 weeks after the shutdown, making sure people are still healthy, making sure they're still mentally in the game, so to speak. But you really find out who your friends are when it's not just the first 3 weeks to find out who is doing okay. And I've made an extremely conscious effort to reach out to people who, I hadn't talked to in 15 years. The pandemic has allowed me to connect with former colleagues who I haven't talked with in 10, 15, and in one case, even 20 years. And that's really rewarding. And it's as if no time has passed, right? So that's been really great. To answer your second question about how do I keep myself out there, and sell my brand, to be very honest with you, watching No Vacancy live has given me the opportunity to watch people who, quite candidly, I'm not going to have any connection to necessarily, reach out to them and say, hey, you had some great feedback on No Vacancy live. Are you interested in connecting with me on LinkedIn?
Right.
And I've had some pretty good success. I don't want to go into the details, but one particular CEO who just appeared on No Vacancy Live, we were connected previously, but I reached out to him and I said, hey, my strong vertical is tour and travel and leisure. That's what's coming back right now. Any chance there's somebody within your organization who will talk to me? And literally he said, send me an email at this address with your credentials. And then he forwarded it on to the senior vice president of sales, as well as one of his recruiters. So, for those who are out there, perhaps still in their pandemic pause, like Wayne Gretzky says, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And that's one thing that's another lesson that I've learned, or that I've honed during this pandemic pause.
Right.
Take the shot. The worst they can say is no.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a big proponent of that as well. We've talked about that on this show before. We certainly have talked about it. Anthony has talked about it on No Vacancy, that this is an unprecedented time to be able to connect with some people. So, you've taken that to heart. But let's also call it what it is. You're a sales professional, right? You're well adept at reaching out, at basically cold calling, at trying to make a connection out of nothing, right? And the fact that they're on No Vacancy Live gives you kind of a warm lead as opposed to a cold lead, right? And if you don't know what's the difference between those, then that's for another show. But not everybody's like that, right? Maybe I'm someone who's not as forward presenting like that. So what would you tell people that are in similar situations as yourself, and similar situations to the place that I was in for a while? What would you tell them about breaking that kind of wall, or breaking that mental block about being able to reach out to somebody out of nowhere that you have no previous relationship with?
That's a tough question. I mean, quite honestly, it goes back to, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
I've never been a shrinking wallflower, so I'm not sure how that, very candidly, how that would work for someone who's not as shy. But at the end of the day, my professional life certainly is a part of who I am. It's not 100% of who I am, but I certainly identify. My career certainly identifies a part of me. And at the end of the day, my goal at this point in time is to get back, to find that on-ramp back into the industry and do what I love so much and what I'm so passionate about. So my advice would be, remember, you're not alone. That's number one. Number two, there are so many other people who are just sitting back and waiting for that opportunity to come. And if you put yourself out there, as hard as that is, if you put yourself out there, that's the first step in forward momentum. And just don't be afraid. Take the shot. Take the shot.
Love it. And, listen, we've talked about this on, I think, the last episode with LJ Crawford. Again, previous episodes. If you're someone out there who does not necessarily feel comfortable reaching out to a CEO or an executive level, or even a recruiter, practice, right? It goes back to that practice, right? Reach out to me. Reach out. I'm sure Michael will be open to speaking with you. Reach out to Michael. Go
Absolutely.
back through these episodes. Every single person that I've had this conversation with has been open to saying, hey, reach out to me. I would be glad to talk to you. I'd be glad to help you. Take advantage of that. Use us as practice, and then take the skills you've learned from that. Whether you learn skills or you just build a little bit of confidence, take that to the next level and do that. So, Michael, you're talking about, you're in Chicago. It's not coming back for a while still, or at least it has looked like that to this point. Other areas of the country are rocking and rolling and at different levels of their recovery. Another theme that we've had on this show several times is the idea of relocation.
Mhm.
And a lot of people have had to either relocate to stay within the industry, to relocate to leave the industry. So have you ever thought about relocating? And if so, what has kind of gone into that process?
So in my current situation, I'm not able to relocate.
Okay.
I actually relocated here to Chicago 13 years ago, and that was a huge decision at that point because my son was about 1 year old, not particularly healthy. He was a micro preemie. When he was born. He was born at 1 pound 9 ounces and had a whole year of life before we were going to move out to what I thought was the great tundra of Chicago. So, that was a little bit difficult. And as my son grows up, I want to be here for him. So at the moment, I'm not relocatable. But it's, I commuted. Well, I will say this: I commuted for 9 months in the time between moving out to Chicago and having a trailing family back in Maryland. So that there is that possibility, but I think the way I'm looking at it is, perhaps there are jobs that can be done remotely. A number of resorts, for example, international resorts, hire people in the United States because this is the source market, right? So I've been looking into those opportunities. Looking into roles where I can do them remotely. I will say that the sales environment that I was in with Hilton was a very high profile sales environment. The way Chicago goes, Hilton to some extent goes as well. And our sales office was basically in a fishbowl. Executives watching, how we were doing, what we were doing, using our sales office as kind of the model for what could be done elsewhere within the system. So,
right.
In that sense, there was a lot of, okay, let's look at things with a fresh perspective. So in that respect, I feel very fortunate that I was working for that office, because I think that type of environment prepares you for that next level. So, that's kind of where I'm going with that. At this point, unfortunately, relocation's not an option for me.
Well, I wouldn't say it's unfortunate. I think that it's really commendable that you're making a decision to make sure, obviously that you're putting obviously your family first, and I don't think anybody would begrudge you that. I certainly don't. So I'm going to take this conversation in a different way.
Sure.
Because I'm in a similar situation where relocating for me it crossed my mind at a time, but it wasn't really tenable, right? We had just recently purchased a house. I have my wife and my 2 young children here. So the idea of going away for a long periods of time, it wasn't something that I was really loving the idea of, but sometimes times call for desperate measures. So you are in a position where you can't relocate for family purposes.
Right.
I'm trying to think the best way to frame this question. Was there any frustration in the sense of not frustration in the sense of I can't leave my family. You know, you made the right decision, but
Mhm.
just frustration that, well, man, I'm here now and I can't do anything about the market. What am I going to do? Right? I can't leave, but there's nothing here for me at this moment. At this moment, is there any kind of frustration that goes into that?
Certainly frustration. At the same time, I'm optimistic. I know that's a message that I alluded to earlier, and it's a message that, quite candidly, has kept me in a great mental place, which is I have professionally lived through 9/11. I have professionally lived through the Great Recession. I will professionally live through and survive and find that on ramp back into the industry at the end of this pandemic pause.
Whatever it is, right?
And that's the message, quite honestly, that I am sharing with everyone who I speak with. Those calls that I make every day. My friends are still unemployed, and it's not easy. I don't want to, by no means am I trying to say that this is easy, but, staying sharp mentally in the game, staying relevant within the industry, taking classes, right? There are still so many certificate programs that are being offered either free or at low cost. Staying on top of the industry by watching your podcast, No Vacancy Live, staying up with industry publications. There are ways to stay resilient and relevant. And that's the message that I share when I'm talking with, my colleagues who are still, sitting on the sidelines waiting for that on-ramp.
That's a great message, right? And for a lot of people in the industry, myself included, we never saw a downturn period, much less a downturn this significant. 9/11, I was in high school and I had just, in 2008, I was going between my sophomore and junior year of college. So professionally, I hadn't seen those. And we talk on different shows about the fact that, hey, people at my age and younger that are in the industry for several years now have only seen growth.
Right.
So Michael, you're talking to someone who, if you're talking to someone who is younger, say 28, 29, 30, I'm 33. What are some of the specific lessons you learned from 9/11 and 2008 from a professional standpoint that has been able to keep that positive message? I get that you've said, that it always comes back around. Right. But what are those lessons that you learned in those moments that you've called back on to stay positive this last year?
You can't do the same thing the same way and expect a different result. As cliche as it sounds, every time that we've had this pause, it's given me the opportunity to think differently, to come at it with a fresh perspective. The very curious thing, though, about this particular pandemic pause, right? On 9/11 and following 9/11, there was a fear of travel. Yep. It was a fear to travel. The recession of 08-09, there wasn't a fear of traveling anymore, but people didn't have the money to travel.
Right.
Okay. You take this pandemic, and not only, so, we had a playbook for fear to travel. 9/11 provided us with a playbook for fear to travel. The 08-09 recession gave us a playbook for what happens when money is tight. Okay. But the pandemic,
I know you're going with this.
The pandemic took the fear of travel, or the fear to travel, took a recession and put those together for which there was no playbook. Add on top of that government restrictions, vaccination rates, infection rates, or positivity rates. All of these things require a fresh way to look at things, because you can't the people who I'm talking to in the industry right now who are working are telling me it is not like it was. You can't think about what worked in 2019. You've got to think differently. You've got to be open to new ways of doing business. And sometimes when I'm listening to a podcast or reading something, listen, I'm not naive enough, and I've been in this industry long enough to know that that hospitality cannot survive just on leisure and tour and travel business.
Yeah.
But at the same time, group has to come back. And I get that. It's part of a business mix. But is it short-sighted? I'm not saying yes or no, but is it worth thinking about diversifying your business mix? Consciously diversifying your business mix so that you don't get caught doing the same things that you've always done. Is there an over-reliance on groups and meetings, or could you find a way to increase the total RevPAR of your leisure guests? I think there's a misperception that tour and travel and leisure guests are cheap and they're only looking for the best deal. At the end of the day, they still have to eat breakfast. Mm-hmm. They still have, they can still go and visit the spa. Maybe they're choosing a rate, maybe they're choosing something with a lower rate because they want to save it to propel the economy, not only at your hotel, but also where your hotel is located. And I think when you look at the entire picture, perhaps there's a way to eke out more money from the segment that's really producing right now and not be so reliant on those big meetings. Because while there's a lot of people that say big meetings are coming back, it's still, by all estimates, 18 months away, at least 18 months away. So what do you do in the meantime?
I love that. And, that goes to a better question, right? How can you change your mindset to make sure that all that additional ad spend stays on your property, right? And it's difficult because you have properties that are, that could be bigger boxes or could be full service type hotels that don't have certain amenities open. The breakfast isn't open, or the restaurant for dinner isn't open. Is there a way? Can you change your mindset to find other ways to get that ancillary spend to stay in your building? So that's a great thought, Michael. There's a very fine balance, right? Because we've all heard, urban resort fees, which are probably the most loathed fees that are out there, right? Yeah. Urban resort fees, early check-in, that's, to me, that takes away the meaning of hospitality. Hospitality means you're welcoming somebody to their second home, whether they're with you for a day or, for a night, or whether they're with you for 4 nights, or whether they're with you for a week. Right. And as the industry moves toward, or has sort of experimented with early check-in fees, and urban resort fees and amenity fees and things like that, that's where I think the consumer gets annoyed. You'd probably make that revenue anyway, but it's one of those things where, are we truly listening to the consumer, or are we, is it a short-term? I got to be careful because I know you're in revenue management, right? But is it a short-term gimmick that is going to ultimately anger those people that are selecting your hotel or not selecting your hotel based on that? Right. To drive that little bit more of revenue. And again, ownership puts a lot of pressure
on general managers and directors of sales in all departments to generate whatever the as much revenue as you can.
Yeah, of course.
At the same time, though, it's a lot easier to maintain a relationship than it is to go out and get a new one. So the cost of acquisition is much more expensive when you have to continually go out and get new clients rather than keeping your rather than keeping your current clients happy, engaged, and loyal.
Well, and then again, it goes back to the conversation that was had yesterday on No Vacancy Live. And if you ever want to go check that one out, it was a great one with Cesar Worm about revenue management. And it all kind of ties back into this common theme that was done during that show, which is, what is the value to the guest? Is the guest leaving saying, I got great value? So if you're paying this rate and you're paying that amenity fee, if you feel like you got great value out of it, it's not a big deal. But if you pay this rate and this amenity fee, but you don't feel like you got great value, it kind of stings, right? So again, not to take this conversation to a no vacancy side of things, but and we're coming up on time. Wow, that went quick. I didn't realize how far we were into it already. For you, right, from a personal standpoint, talking about that value proposition, right? How do you go about changing your game? How do you go about changing your value proposition to a company to make you more attractive to companies as they start to hire?
That, thank you for, that's kind of like almost a sell yourself kind of question.
It really is. Which I wasn't going to put it out there, Michael. You want to put me on the spot? Fine, let's do it.
But at the end of the day, experience is worth something, right? To have gone through what I've gone through again in my professional career, experience is important, but the ability to bring fresh eyes to something, a fresh perspective to what to a company, and say, you know what, maybe why haven't we tried it this way? Again, going back to being a shrinking wallflower, which I'm not. I'm happy to provide different viewpoints, and I've thrived in environments where my viewpoint, maybe it's not the right viewpoint, but at least it gets people thinking about different ways of doing things. And that's where I think my secret sauce is. It's the experience, the depth of my thought process and where things can be, and not just settling for the status quo, which it just baffles my mind how there are hotels that have been reliant on business travel, which isn't coming back forever, and they're not hiring anybody back because they're waiting for business travel to come back. That just it blows my mind when I hear that. But it's a sense of urgency. Again, having been in that fishbowl in Chicago with Hilton, it's that sense of urgency, that sense of we need to look at different metrics than we did in 2019 and previously,
right?
And determine what those next steps are.
I love it. Well, Michael, wow, that was a really, really great episode. And again, I think we can go on for another 45 minutes, honestly. But it was great to hear you kind of bring your experience to the table, right? And again, from someone who has been through 9/11 and 08 as a professional level person and made it through, and now is dealing with this and making it through, and keeping that positive mindset and continuously learning for what, not only how you're going to come out of this in the short term, but what it means for your long term as well. Because right, listen, we're going to have a downturn again, probably not as bad as this, right? But there will be a downturn in the industry again. And yes. What can you take away from those experiences that will help you through that next one? So I think that's a great message to take home. So any kind of final words from you, my friend?
for all the viewers out there who are, kind of still in this pandemic pause, keep your head up, take the shot. You're going to miss the shot if you don't take it, and watch Dave and watch these podcasts. There's a lot of really great information out there, and it helps you to stay resilient and relevant and ahead of the curve, because there are so many people who aren't doing that right now. And that's how you stay ahead of the curve.
Love it. Great stuff, Michael. Well, thank you very, very much for joining me today. And I will see you in a little bit on No Vacancy Live.
Sounds great. Dave, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Michael. Wow. Listen, there was a lot to take away from there, guys. So, heed Michael's message. Continue to push. Continue to re-evolve yourself professionally, to re-evolve what you know, to reevaluate what you want to do moving forward. And listen, he made some great points about getting yourself out there, because not everyone's doing that. If you are in this industry, if you want to be in this industry, this is a great time to make connections. Reach out on LinkedIn. If you're not fully confident, as we said earlier, connect with me. I would love to just talk to you, start you off, connect with Michael, go back to the previous episodes here and see, pretty much every guest I had on this show was open to connecting with someone who wants to be able to kind of hone that skill, because it really is a major life ability to be able to present yourself and step out of that box and network with people that you necessarily wouldn't have networked with in the past. So thank you all for being my guest today. Another great episode. We have some more coming up soon. Of course, hit me up on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all the great places. And other than that, we will talk to you next time. Thanks a lot.